On this episode of AV Week, is your wireless system, meaning your wireless mics, illegal? And if it is, what do you do about it? Also taking a look at the trend of putting commercial AV systems onto the network and streaming. All that and more. Next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 503, recorded Friday, April 9th, 2021. Soft AV.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Sure, Sound Extraordinary,
and by FSR, and by Crestron.
This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audiovisual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to discuss the news and information we have gathered this week, first and foremost, the maven of AV. Her name is Dawn Mead. Welcome, ma'am.
Thanks so much for having me, as usual, Tim.
Absolutely. Also with us is Steve Greenblatt from Control Concepts. Welcome, sir.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And last but not least, no, not the entire program is made up of hosts of AV Week or AVNation. Anthony Watson, a young man I got to meet through our friends over at USC. So welcome, sir. You work for USC. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. A couple things, and this is some more housekeeping. We're doing something brand new this week. I've never really made it a secret on how we do things and how we make the sausage. We are recording, moving from Zoom over to a system called Riverside. So if you hear something different or it looks different, I apologize. But we are trying something new, quite frankly, to increase our quality and to serve you better, the people, wonderful people who listen to us and watch us. So give us a little bit. We'll work through some bugs. These fine folks can tell you that, well, we're recording it at 15 after the hour because Tim couldn't figure out how to turn his camera on this system. So I do apologize, but thank you guys for bearing with us. First story comes to us from our friends over at Sound and Communications and Joe Ciadelli. He writes, "Are your wireless microphones illegal?" What Joe's writing about is the fact that there are some systems in the 600 and 700 megahertz bandwidth that are not technically allowed anymore, and that is because the wonderful U.S. government agency, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, have sold off a number of frequencies. They've done this to provide wireless spectrum for the wireless carriers. Now, what that's done, though, is that's squeezed the wireless microphone components and manufacturers into various other areas. Dawn, when it comes to, Dawn works and lives in and around the alphabet soup area of the Maryland/Washington D.C. area. We do not say where she works for, but she is an end user. Ostensibly, you've got to stay legal, right? At least that would be ideal. What does this mean? Every time that the FCC sells off another block of frequency, how do you stay ahead of that, and how do you stay on top of that as somebody who has a budget to maintain?
Well, it's a difficult task to stay on top of and in front of, particularly in an area like the DMV, where Northern Virginia, D.C., Baltimore, we've got so many people, so many companies, so many agencies, and so many blocked out secret frequencies going on around here that you can't always rely on a chunk of frequency being open for wireless mics, especially as they sell it off more and more. Now, I'm going to get sort of sassy for a minute here. If you are watching this or listening to this and you are an integrator and you are not aware of this issue, you shouldn't be an integrator. I personally have been blogging about and writing about this particular topic since 2009. Okay. That's what, 12 years
It's true.
ago?
She really has. You can look them up.
Yeah. I mean, you can go back to my early personal blog. You can go back to some of the stuff in the Rave archive. This is not a new issue. So if you're in integration and you're not actively educating your customers about this issue, shame on you. Absolutely shame on you at this point. Now, I will say end users, when I became an end user, joined this organization, which is very large, multinational organization. There are a lot of places that still technically have illegal microphones. And the first thing I did when I started was some of these projects that were coming up on life cycle refreshes. I said, what microphones do you have in there? Okay, FYI, those are illegal. We could get in a buttload of problems with, the government for using that. Heaven help the corporation if, some of the frequencies were allocated to public safety. So heaven help you if you've got a fire department or a police department or an ambulance service trying to react to an emergency and they're picking up your shareholders meeting, So it's not a basic issue. It's a very serious issue that we all need to be aware of. And I've been educating in the 4 years now I've been where I am, a lot of my end users of, hey, even if you don't have the budget to refresh your whole system, be aware of things like this FCC ruling and the fact that these microphones are illegal because, part of our job as internal AV specialists is not just designing systems that will work for our company and be cost effective. It's risk mitigation. And our job is to make sure that the company is not liable for damages, for breaking the law, for any number of things. And, it's more than just hanging a screen on the wall, guys, or putting a mic in a room. You have to be aware of all of these issues. So, this is a big topic, and I can't believe in 2021 we're still talking about it. But, the system that I first educated my company on is finally getting refreshed this year. So, 3.5 years later, we finally went from, hey, that's illegal to, okay, we're getting the budget and it's getting redone.
Well, Anthony, I'll bring you on this because you're also the other end user on this. USC, public university, California system. There are certainly, most likely, there are certainly some sensitive conversations that happen wirelessly on a college campus. Probably not to the extent of a shareholder meeting, like in Don's case. But how do you keep this in front of the powers that be, right? That the folks who do allow or do give, the budgets out, because Don just made a point there, is the fact that it took 3.5 years to basically refresh out a system that was no longer, viable. How do you keep your institution and the folks that kind of sit at those design and those budgeting tables? How do you keep them informed and making that decision to pull the trigger on a maybe an outlay of maybe 100 to 200 wireless systems?
Sure. For us in our environment, the biggest thing is that we do the checks and balances. Like Don mentioned earlier, it's our job, to be the experts. So when we do get ready to refresh a system, instead of wasting money, we won't do things like replacing unnecessary hardware. But in the instance of microphones and keeping up with the right bands, it's important that we do our checks and balances first. So first and foremost, it's our job to present this information to the powers that be. And so, every year we go through our rooms and we look at the hardware. We look to see, what piece of hardware has and has not been replaced in the last cycle. And for instance, things like Ethernet cables, every 2 to 5 years, we need to replace those because they've got a cycle of life themselves. You plug them in so many times and unplug them, and that causes a breakdown, right? And so it's our job to, look at that hardware, to know how long that hardware has been in the room, and to do these checks and balances. For instance, with certain manufacturers using certain bands. Just this last year alone, we recommended we move over to the G and H band in rooms that we did not have those bands. And so, like I said, for us, it's up to us to be those checks and balances and present that information to the powers that be, and they'll be more than happy to upgrade us once they know the importance of it. So that's a big deal for us.
Yeah, and that's actually a really, really interesting move there between those different bands as we move forward. Steve, something that Dawn mentioned here, and the fact that she's been talking about this for over a decade. How do we as an industry not only keep ourselves educated about this, but also keep our government educated about what it does to us as an industry?
I would say that it's a combination of the manufacturers, of course, that sell the equipment, because they obviously have a vested interest in making sure that their equipment is purchased and used properly, and they have to do right. Then you also have the industry associations that I think are very good at or need to be thought or look to provide guidance, and also to be that voice for the industry. So to your second part about how to talking with the government and informing people of our existence and the importance, that's what I would say is that we have to look to the biggest voices that we can find and that represent our industry, that being the industry associations. But I think our industry always needs more and more education, and education isn't only in the form of doing a webinar or doing a presentation, but more so explaining being a translator, because I think, and we find this a lot in our space in programming and understanding when these new technologies come out, what does it mean to an end user client, and how do you make it so that they understand and can put things into perspective with regard to their uses, their application, and what's important to them, because there's a lot of confusion that happens, and much of it comes from the fact that there's a lot of marketing information that is going out in a broad sense, and not everybody needs to know all of the information. You only need to know what pertains to you and how that impacts what you're doing in particular.
All right, very good.
And if I could, Tim,
Yep,
just
absolutely.
jumping on top of that, if you're an integrator watching this, I know I yelled at you earlier, but if you're an integrator watching this, talk to your customers. Yeah, talk to your customers, educate them, as Steve said. If you know your customer doesn't have a Dawn or an Anthony on staff who is the AV expert that would know about these things, educate them. If you are an end user internal like Anthony and myself, educate your bosses, educate your other departments, let them know that this is a real issue. And, you don't all have to do what our buddy Josh Shrego did and put your AV career on hold and go to law school. But if you do, he's the JD for AV. But, educate yourself and be active. I know that NSCA has contacted me when I was an integrator a couple of times to go down to Annapolis to speak when there are bills that come up that impact our industry. I know that Infocom does similar lobbying efforts. So if you're in a state and you hear through one of the associations or just through buzz from your friends and neighbors and coworkers that there's a bill going to affect you, find out if you can speak on it. Because, for the people, by the people, of the people, we're the people. Get out there and tell them what the issue is and let them know how it's impacting a multi-billion-dollar industry with, ties in their community.
Well, one quite caveat there. Infocom doesn't do that anymore. And I had a conversation with CEO Dave Labuscus just last week about that very thing. And Mitchell put a link to it when we're done here, because it is expensive. I understand Mr. Labuscus's point. But I think I made my points known on that as well. I think that if we all gather together, we could make some noise. So,
and for what it's worth, just this past week, NSCA did a webinar about pending bills that are up before different states that impact our industry. So just keep an eye out for things like that, and let your voice be heard.
Thanks so much for watching this first segment of AV Week. To check out the rest of the episode for free, click on the link below or go by the website, avnation.tv. It's avnation.tv.